Well, this is Origins of Our Faith. My name is Rick Richardson. Thanks for being with me on another program. I thought we might, talk about a subject we talk about a lot, or I talk about a lot, because I think it's the essence of really what the Bible's all about, but then go into a little bit of explanation as far as, well, what do you do about it? And that is the distinction between the three main groups of people that we read about in throughout the Bible, but especially in a New Testament context. And that is, when you are reading through, and especially if you go through, like what we did on the last couple of programs, talking about the book of Romans, and how Paul talks and deals with three different groups of people: Jews and Gentiles and Israel. Now, it's important to understand those distinctions. If you don't understand it, you will believe that Paul is saying something he certainly is not. He says Israel's eyes have been blinded. They were, these people that were not good. They didn't obey God. They fell away. All these things talking about that northern kingdom, which is exactly correct. And their eyes are blinded until the end. And then they'll return, and that's when both houses, the house of Israel and the house of Judah, as they're referred to in throughout the prophets, both houses of Israel will come together and will have one ruler who is Messiah that will rule over both kingdoms, and then an era of peace will come throughout the world. Okay, so that's the basics of what the Bible really deals with. Understanding that, it's a lot easier to read certain things within the New Testament to understand it in context. And realize that it's not at odds at all with Judaism. It's not at odds with what the culture of the first century was. It is at odds with really what much of modern Christianity believes. Because you'll read certain things and say, well, Paul's contradicting himself here. He said this and now he's saying this. What does he mean? Well, again, to get to the very issue of what's going on, the 12 tribes existed when Israel left Egypt. However, when they settled in the land and then eventually had a king, King David, and then King Solomon, and then King Solomon's son Rehoboam, at the point that Solomon died, the kingdom split in two. The northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, the house of Israel, the house of Judah, Israel and Judah, existed as two separate kingdoms with two separate kings. Customs were kept differently. The days of worship, as far as high days, the holy days, were moved because Jeroboam, the leader of the northern kingdom, the house of Israel, did not want his people to go back and to Jerusalem on the feast days and say, you know what, we should get together again. He didn't want that. He wanted the power and all that for himself. And so he changed God's days as far as the days from the 7th month to the 8th month and did various other things. The place of worship changed from Jerusalem to a couple of different places. I think Dan and Bethel were the two places that he set up. And things became very different. However, these two nations coexisted for about 230 years. At that point, because the northern kingdom, the house of Israel, they decided, well, we're not going to pay tribute to the Assyrians. And they'd worked out an agreement with the Egyptians that Egypt would help defend the northern kingdom, Israel, and it would be something that they would stand together against this tyranny of being told, well, you have to pay tribute to Assyria. Well, Israel thought, well, sure, let's do this. And so Israel withheld payment. They didn't pay tribute, and Assyria wasn't happy. Well, Egypt didn't come to Israel's defense at all. They said, well, okay, I know we said we'd help you, but you're on your own. And so the Assyrian Empire came against Israel with much effort and took them into captivity. They displaced them from the land that they were in and brought other people in to settle. These other people were not Israelite at all, and they settled in the land and became known as the Samaritans. They had any blood relation to the Israelites. But they had trouble once they moved in, that lions were attacking them. And so it was discussed and determined, we need you to bring back one of the priests of Israel so he could teach us the religion of the land so the lions don't get us. And that's what was decided. And so one of the priests came back and taught them about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but a very, not, if you were Jewish, you would say not a kosher view, something that was very different. They considered themselves, as time went on, to be chosen just as the Jews were chosen. And that was something that didn't set well with the Jewish people, who were the remaining 3 tribes of Israel, because their brothers that were in the north, the family that they had, were all taken captive and dispersed throughout the Assyrian Empire. And now you have these imposters in their place, the Samaritans, claiming that, well, they are the chosen people too. Because look, they're worshiping the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So during the first century, a lot of animosity towards the Samaritans was going on. And that's evident when you hear stories and the attitude that you see revolving the Samaritans. Okay, so that gives us a setting as far as what the first century was like and who was involved. There was Greek society involved a couple of hundred years before the first century, so after the Assyrians captured the northern kingdom, after Babylon captured the southern kingdom, and then they moved back into the land and set up a kingdom again. Rebuilt the temple, Ezra and Nehemiah, rebuilding the temple, and it came about that after having their kingdom set up once again and being in the land and all those things, what happened is the Greek world decided, hey, we're going to enforce our rule on these people here that are known as the Hebrews, the Jews, whatever they would call it at the time, and we are going to make them worship other gods. And so that's when the story of the Maccabees, the story that revolves around the day of Hanukkah, came about a couple of hundred years before the first century. Well, because of this assimilation, because of this being absorbed into the Greek society around them, and that became so prevalent, there was also feelings against assimilating or even associating with Gentiles. So Gentiles or Samaritans, and they're viewed as 2 different categories. Again, the Samaritans were people that they really didn't like because they were make-believe. They said that they were Israel. They were not. And the Gentiles, they had a lot of animosity there because of assimilation and of Jews that did not want to remain true to their faith, being persuaded and moving into worship of other gods. So, at the time we get to the first century, we have a lot of things playing into the scenario. We have also a time when there was a lot of feeling that this was the time that Messiah was going to come, primarily due to some of the things that were written by the prophet Daniel. And because of that, he then told about this prophet or this Messiah that was going to come and was going to redeem the northern kingdom, Israel. So a lot of expectation, a lot of anticipation, a lot of just longing and waiting for this big event to happen. All right, that sets us up with a little background. We'll talk a little bit more about what it was like in the first century and how some of the misunderstandings came about and all that when we get back. Take a short break and come right back.